It's nice to meet ya. Hey, come in and have a slice of pizza.
Welcome to another fantastic episode of Pop Punk and Pizza Podcast. Super grateful that you're here for it. And our guest is a man of many talents today. He's a fantastic producer, mixer, songwriter, even podcaster. And then on top of all that good, amazing stuff, he's the guitarist and one of the founding members of Philadelphia's The Wonder Years. So let's give a big warm welcome to Casey Cavaliere. How's it going, Casey?
Oh, it's good. Honestly, I assume you'll have a lot of lovely crowd sound effects or crickets.
Usually I do, and that's one thing I do with StreamYard. Like I usually I'll like patch in my iPad, and my iPad has like
brilliant,
all those sound effects that I can.
So fun.
Yeah, that I can shoot off. So
that's amazing.
Yeah, I'll have to put those in post later for you. But usually
so that when I listen back, it feels a little bit more energetic and enthusiastic. I assume they're all cheering. You know, it's like also like being in a band, you learn to kind of suspend disbelief by playing in front of maybe some less than sympathetic crowds to what you're doing on the way up. So that's also become a skill set where I'm just like, I just got to pretend that they're really liking it and keep on rocking through it. So that's what I'm going to do here and assume that it'll all be okay in post. But yes, Jacob, thank you for having me. This should be a fun chat, and I appreciate that you start out with such genuine gratitude to your listeners. It's a big plus. I like that about you.
Thanks, man. I appreciate. Well, you know, without our listeners, I wouldn't be able to do this, you know, for the last 5 years now. So it's just it's something that I always want to be grateful for, you know, and I'm sure you do the same thing with, you know, the record process podcast, you know.
You said it with most of the things I do. Without ears for the things that I do to go into as an audio professional, musician, and now podcaster. It's kind of a lonely, one-sided world without that. That's a very important, I think. Yeah, I mean, in any realm of art, you know, the point of it is kind of the reaction from the other side. Is the point of it is to be consumed. So is it really art until it's consumed? Is it really content until someone digests it? I don't know. If a tree falls in the forest, Jacob, let's get right into it. Let's just dive into like the Stoics. Let's dive into Greek philosophy. Let's give the listeners something really heavy to chew in so that they just hard out or all the way in the first 2 minutes.
They're just eating their pizza and having these deep thoughts while listening to this episode right now. They're just like, man, that's a really good, you know, seriously though, that is a great question. Like, is it actually art if it's not consumed? I mean, I will go ahead and disagree that art doesn't have to be consumed in order to be art, but maybe it does. Maybe my thought process on that is completely wrong.
I don't think there's a wrong thing. I think to you it can be art, but it's like that weird period where a band has a record. I don't know, not that I can relate to this right now as we speak, but has an entire record finished that nobody has heard yet. And it's like kind of your own, and you love it. You did what you set out to do and then some, but it also hasn't really fully become part of the world that we've built yet, you know? So I think it's the secondary level of art, right? Because I think a lot of art is kind of, you know, commentary. It's telling a story, but then it's ultimately kind of the connection that comes out of that. These are the kind of conversations that, God forbid, someone ever works with me. This is what they get.
This is what you guys talk about. This is what
maybe not so much for Wonder Years anymore, but yeah, definitely. If I'm like producing a band or a song, I get really deep inside of it to kind of, you know, and not just to like think of myself as like a highfalutin, you know, philosopher, but like truly like the essence of like, what are you trying to do with this song, with this story, with these lyrics, you know, with this part musically? It's like, ultimately you're trying to like pull a reaction out, you know, whether it be from yourself. And then that's the litmus when, you know, you're hearing it back and you're like, great, it makes me want to like pit and punch through a wall right now. Job done, you know, or it makes me want to curl in a corner of a dark room under a blanket and cry. Okay, great. That's exactly what I was going for, you know? I don't know. It doesn't have to be, I guess. You're very right. But it takes on a new chapter, and it fully realizes its potential when it meets its audience.
It's almost like I feel like our goal now on this episode is to come up with a word. We need to make up a word to call that piece of art before it's actually art. Like there needs to be another word between that. You know, you're referencing sitting on a record, but it's just you and the band's record because no one else has heard it. So there needs to be, we need to come up with a word to specifically address that and give it a name.
Well, listen, I don't know as much about podcasting as you do yet, but this feels like a great opportunity to, I don't know, maybe turn it to your audience.
Yeah, there we go.
Maybe it's not for us to decide. Maybe it's not a term for us to coin, right? Maybe somebody out there is sitting, and has gone and switched that Miller Lite with their slice of pizza out for a delirium tremens and is like, hey, this is going to be a really highbrow evening right now. And maybe they've got the perfect word. So if they do, shout out to the podcast or myself or somebody, because now I want to know. You're right. It's because it's not anti-art. It's not pre-art, because it is maybe art, but what is it? Like, what do you call?
Yeah. What do you call it?
In the developmental stage, or it's kind of like an athlete that knows they're incredible. They know they can run the 40, but they're not out there on the team yet winning a Super Bowl,
Yeah.
So it's like before you put them into the actual game and see how they respond and the crowd responds. I don't know.
Yeah.
A lot of analogies getting thrown out here very early on.
But another thing you're talking about though, like having these crazy conversations or like deep conversations while you're in the studio working with someone. I feel like I've experienced that almost every single time I've recorded a song with a producer. Like we end up on some topic and it just goes like haywire. Like we end up talking, it doesn't even have to be like about the song. It can be about something completely different, but we just deep dive into it and we're like, yeah, like how does that actually work? And like they should do it this way, or we might be talking about Star Wars or something and it just goes into this big, I just feel like that happens in the studio. And then 8
hours later, you're like, oh, I guess we got to book more time. We didn't get any of that vocal track. I know that side of it too. I also think that's a really important qualifier for developing a connection and developing a trust. You know what I mean? Even if whatever you're talking about is not at all related to the song, it's all related to the level of trust and care that you feel like you're receiving. Even if it's an engineer that you hire out from the studio and you don't know him or her at all, you walk in, it's like, that's a really intimate and personal thing to have someone line up and hear your raw vocal take or your best effort on whatever instrument you're putting out there as a complete stranger. So that was a big thing to learn about producing and working with other bands, is not just, hey, let's get the song where it needs to go, or let's round some corners on this, but to actually realize you're kind of, if you're tracking a vocalist, you're almost at certain points more like unqualified therapist than you are engineer. It's about getting them in a nice headspace. And sometimes you have to have those if you've allowed for and built time into the process, of course, which is also a really important factor. Those periods to go off on some tangents where you really feel like you're connecting with who's making it and that they know a little bit more about you. So they know down the line, maybe you're searching for the right instrument or the right part or the right thing to finish something off. And they're like, hey, this idea came to me, and because I know X, Y, and Z about you, or because we already had this conversation,
yes,
I feel like I'm going to bring it up. Right. So it all kind of is relevant, but so much to say that when you get into collaboration, and we do discuss this actually a lot on the record process too. It's a very like collaboration heavy conversation from episode to episode. And I love that about it, because at the core of that is all just realizing it's just relationships. All of this is just relationships. It's relationships with the audience, with your fans, people that listen to the show, people that listen to records. And then when you're making them, it's the same thing. It's about how solid are those relationships, and I think the product that gets yielded reflects the quality of those relationships and how deep they were able to go, how off the walls they were willing to get because someone felt really comfortable, or someone baked in time to try it, or someone went the extra mile with it. And I love that. I love that shit,
Yeah, that makes me, sometimes you learn some things about some of your favorite records that you're just shocked to hear about, I remember having a conversation with someone one time about one of my favorite albums that they put out in the last couple of years. I'm like, dude, that was your best album. And then they tell me like, yeah, but it was absolutely hell. Like the whole process was absolutely hell. And they talk about how the feelings and the relationship between the members in the band and the producers and the engineers, it was just all bad vibes, but the record was amazing. So you think, well, what would have happened if the relationships between the members and the producers and the engineers and all of that, what if it was actually good? And then you think, man, that album would have been like 20 times even more amazing than it ended up turning out,
Yeah. I mean, there's a little bit to the kind of lightning in a bottle thing, but also it is interesting that it doesn't always have to be, and that's not always to say that it has to be perfect, right? There is good and bad, and all of that affects how something comes out, right? If you have a vocalist and they are, coming up to a bridge and it's say we're like way back in the early 2000s and this is like Screamo is having its moment, right?
Yes,
you maybe don't want them to be like super relaxed and comfortable. Well, they have to go like spill their guts out about something that infuriates them or that is like cripplingly, all consuming, with an emotion. So I don't know, maybe it's just like, hey, maybe sometimes you do need to get a little pissed off if you're a vocalist. I've seen this work wonders with our drummer, Michael. Like he, we've recorded.
You piss him off before like he does a take?
No, I mean, not intentionally, but you get to a point where you're, trying to, I've watched him cut drums in pre-pro, and there is a certain delicate balance. And sometimes people can get this wrong and really like take a negative turn. And sometimes you watch like masters that just know the person and know kind of how to read them and work with them and know when to be, when to be really like, throw a little elbow jab there, after 5 times be like, nah, still not getting the fill. And then all of a sudden you're just like, yeah, I don't know. Maybe we'll just move on and I'll edit it. And then all of a sudden it's like, oh, fuck no. All right, one more. And then just destroys it, right? It's like knowing what to say and when to guide that kind of instinct, in a player and a drummer is really important too. And I think sometimes that is what you hear. So maybe some of those records were that good because they were pissed off at the label or the producer, and they were like, "Oh, I'll fucking show you right now."
It's true. It's absolutely
so it's interesting.
True.
And we kind of explore that good and bad on the show, depending on the record, because the circumstances of a lot of these records matter, right? And sometimes you might not be aware as a fan how they matter because you digest them at your own time and place in your life. And it's all kind of relevant. But sometimes it's interesting to see, to go back, or even in the, in the simplest of most boiled down kind of analogies, it's almost like hey, I always thought this song was about this. And then you meet the songwriter and you're like, no, actually it was for me, not about that at all, but that's actually great and very cool. So there is like a delicate balance to that sometimes, because letting, music or a song or art be whatever it, is going to be to the audience, that's not always 100% up for you to control as the musician, as the producer, as the songwriter, or as the podcast host. Even you came into this and you're like, yeah, this will be a nice chat. And you had no idea where we were going.
But I love
and neither
that.
did your
I
listeners.
Love surprises,
Yeah. And being able to steer into those, I think, is also, something that we talk about where you're just like, hey, this is the hand we were dealt. And if we want to get back to even more Stoic philosophy, letting the obstacle be the way, right? It sometimes can be a really, really cool way to let things evolve naturally. So
absolutely. So Casey, I think the first time that I discovered that you were a producer and a mixer and an engineer, outside of doing the Wonder Years, was relatively not that long ago. I think it was in 2020 when I talked with Drew of I Call Fives. He was on Hot Punk and Pizza, and
Mr. Conti.
Yeah, Conti. He's such a fun guy. We had a great time. But I'm pretty sure he was the one that was like, "Yeah, we've been working with, Casey from the Wonder Years," and I'm like, "Oh," I was like, "I didn't know." Casey. Yeah. I was like, I didn't know he did that. So where does your love for, producing and mixing come into play? When did that start? Was that way before the Wonder Years, or was it, playing and writing in the Wonder Years? Did that kind of bring your interest to the whole producing and mixing aspect?
Yeah, I think it's probably a little bit more towards the latter, in that it was a progression. I've always written and demoed ideas for the band, and even before Wonder Years, right? When I was in a band, like the first, band as a kid, like 11, 12 years old, my bass player Josh and I, both playing bass and guitar respectively, in that band actually. So it's been, 2+ decades, playing side by side with him. And, even that band, I had a little Tascam 4-track cassette recorder, and we like recorded a whole full length live, of songs that were like, I'll say like heavily like 90s alt rock and or like Green Day influenced in their own way. But we had to veer a little bit differently because we also had a keyboard player who was maybe the most talented player like in the band at that time. So we were like, I don't know, we got to do something with this. I guess we'll cover Closing Time by Semisonic. That's got piano in it. So, I mean, it started kind of there where I was like, I got to figure out I only got 4 channels and where the vocal's going to go. And like, I'll put a mic between the drums and the bass amp, and that'll kind of get that, right? Like all those things, figuring out what does and doesn't work and how, just to try and capture it. And then over the last like 2+ decades, then, with Wonder Years, especially, you just do it so much, you demo a part, write, full arrangements of like, here's what like a little look for this, this section could be with full guitar idea. Here's like a little vocal melody or a melody theme. Here's what the drum groove could kind of be like, but then also allowing space for, the rest of the band to put their signature on it in certain places. And then eventually, you see what those initial like real quick what I'll call like down and dirty demos, start to sound like, and then you see the full progression of what the final tracks sound like. And eventually each record, I was like, let me put a little more time into this. Let me get a little closer. And I became kind of consumed and really intrigued, not only just in the songwriting stuff, but in the actual process of getting really solid takes, tracking things correctly and putting more care into that, and then understanding how to build this kind of like sonic world and, get things to work cohesively in a really dense style of music, from a mixing standpoint. So it was kind of a progression like that. And then eventually, probably 5 years ago or so, I started, realizing that like, man, I so much of the creative output is Wonder Years based, but there is time where we're not on the road, and time where like we've just finished putting together a record, and I'm like, I'm not necessarily going to write 10 more Wonder Years songs or ideas right now. I'm kind of a little tapped stylistically on that, but I still want to be making music. I still am obsessed with that pursuit of trying to move people emotionally. And I was like, wait a second, there is a never ending supply of really incredible creative people. And maybe I can, ask some of them where their thoughts are, or maybe they want a hand or need a hand, or are looking for someone to kind of, come in from a collaborative end in the studio to work on their stuff. And surprisingly, there were options. Drew and the guys in I Call Fives were one of them. That was like a cool serendipitous reunion of them coming back and doing more songs. And it was a time and a place where I had just gotten into and just built a new studio space right across the bridge, right just outside of Philadelphia. And it was kind of a perfect time for them. So that was one of the many kind of local and regional projects that I worked on. And then I started kind of expanding some more, people that were familiar with Wonder Years stuff, started reaching out, saw what I was doing. And then, it's been interesting. The pandemic, the last couple years, actually kind of did what I already saw happening, which was in a really, silver lining kind of way, shine a light on the fact that, the modern commercial like recording industry, as it were, with like big fancy studios, is definitely shifting to a more home recording, phase. And I think there are some really cool positives to that in terms of what independent artists can work out about themselves creatively. We spent a lot of time having friends track us early on. We got all the bad songs out. We got all the, or a lot of that to figure out who we were. Right. And I realized, that point in the process is really important as well. And actually really fun for me. And what I've done with Wonder Years has illuminated a lot of really cool aspects of getting to be in a band for so long with the same people and watch almost from the outside as it evolves as a force and an organism all of itself and finds its footing and what it is and what it isn't. And I wanted to do that more with other bands because I think it's exciting and and I remember what it was like to be in that, like, no, our band doesn't do this, or like our band, I don't know what we do. It's like, and figuring out who you are. It's like, you can't do it in one song,
No.
It's a little easier to do it in like 5 to 6. You can provide a little bit more depth on the roster,
Yes.
But it's not until you start conceptualizing from kind of like a long-term standpoint. Hey, where are you going? You can't do it all in, one studio session. So let's focus and make sure that whatever you put out is like the best foot forward from a quality standpoint. And you're going to learn and grow, and you're going to bring new stuff in. And every artist and musician and songwriter that I work with is all at a very uniquely different point in their career when it comes to that. So it's really cool. And so I've gravitated to doing a lot more of that, even remotely so because of the pandemic,
Right.
Sessions that look like this, where, we're sharing, like bedroom recordings back and forth, where they don't need to like come into the studio to give me an idea of what the song sounds like, and a lot of that can be done ahead of time, or even if, they have a setup and a really nice studio that's local to them, then I can come in at that point in the process and help tailor some of the songs to do exactly what they're trying to do, but maybe don't have the like 15, 20 years of, no, that's not the best, or there's another way that you can actually try to achieve that kind of thing. So it's been fun, man. Yeah.
So when you who was the first band or the first artist that you worked with outside of the Wonder Years, when you're like, okay, I want to do this, I want to do this producing and engineering and mixing, songwriting with other artists and other bands? What was that first experience like for you? What are some things that come to mind when you think about it?
Yeah, it's interesting, actually. I feel like some of them, in true anybody that's, looking to break into or has already broken into, the like recording engineer kind of game, so to speak, it's usually your friends and people that are some of your first clients, with some heavy air quotes, right? And so for me, it wasn't any different. It was, we've always done some stuff on the side. There's a heavy creative output with Wonder Years, so it's kind of been throwing ideas back and forth about each other's side projects, and that helped a lot too, because they're perspectives and people that we're familiar with. And then beyond that, it started out probably being still some friends, but I started doing records with like some of the people that actually helped me put together the studio initially. There's a band from Philly called Honey Jar, who one of my studio partners, Adam. This was, a couple years ago that we did this record at this point, but it was kind of like a cool indie, like dream pop record. Obviously, it's not in the pop punk purview, so to speak, but still a great record, and the songs are incredible. And I helped put that together, track the drums, and help where I could with that. And it was just such a cool, fulfilling thing to even if I wasn't doing everything on a record, to play a role and play a hand in something that I really believed in. So it was a couple things like that. And then it was a few other, local bands, whether they were punk bands, reggae bands, or even just, some random kind of like walk-in studio clients that were like, hey, I have these 10 songs. I just don't have a band, and I don't know, where to go with them. I just want them like finished and be like, okay, let's come up with arrangements and build you a record of, these songs, and then kind of like track them and wear all those hats, wear kind of an arranger hat, a recording engineer hat, and a session musician hat, all in one. So there were some projects like that were, maybe stylistically not the first thing that I would have expected to come through the door, but did, and they were a lot of fun. So
I was going to say that's got to be a lot of fun. Like you're literally kind of starting from scratch, and you're just like, hey, let's fucking make this thing, like
yeah, and it was that's really cool too, because we're kind of moving really quick, where we'd go based off of just kind of like vocal demos and a solo kind of acoustic guitar, like very singer-songwriter, and you'd have to build an entire world around it and make stylistic choices and say, no, let's play more to this like kind of like 50s like Little Richard vibe. No, let's play more to this kind of like 70s classic rock, like George Thorogood vibe on this, from track to track, but have it all kind of feel like it lived in the same world for the client. And that was such a cool experience, and so fun too, to kind of just stretch, but then try to picture where they would potentially be really happy and proud to have the song go and have it live, in its final, like kind of cemented form. And so stuff like that, it was all learning and growing experiences too, in terms of doing it on a commercial level, because then you're delivering something. You're not just playing around with demos or, doing mixes for friends. So it kind of helped me learn and start to adjust and recalibrate, so to speak, to do it on a much more professional level, I guess.
And, I would imagine you learn something new from each project, whether it is something where you're literally like building a band in the studio, kind of like what you just talked about, to you're already working with a band and you're just helping them kind of perfect their song or perfect their craft. I'm sure there's a takeaway from each session or each project that you do.
Oh, big time. I am right now in the midst of a period at the beginning of this year where I am learning more every day than my brain can probably catalog and store at such a pace, with how much I'm trying to do, and how many clients and artists I'm working with on like very wide streams of the spectrum, from like a lo-fi, like indie and like punk kind of act, all the way to like a hyper pop, like EDM pop punk, like future punk remix, like type stuff. And then everything organically in between. Some of the I Call Five stuff. There's going to be more of that stuff coming this year that we did, things like that. So it kind of runs the gamut. And it's super interesting, because I think too, what I've learned, I guess, I'll say this because I think it's always interesting. And for anybody that might be, curious about doing, or getting involved in the pursuit of recording, production, whatever, a lot of people will tell you, and you will see some generally regarded advice that says niche down, like find your genre, your subgenre, and just be the best at that. Right. And I don't think that that's bad advice. I truly don't. It's clearly worked for a lot of people that I know. And the people that are giving that advice are clearly giving that from a place that they saw it work on their journey. Right. And I've grappled with that idea too, because clearly I know the guitar-driven rock genre and punk space probably better than almost any other from an intimate vantage point, because I've lived it for the last 15, 20 years, came up and grew up as a fan of it as well before I started getting more and more ingrained in it and involved in it. However, what I've realized is I am learning to treat things on more of a core emotive level than a genre trope level sonically, by stretching and working on and kind of flipping the script and saying, okay, this is like a very minimalist, like ambient kind of indie rock, record. And then going over here and being like, this is literally a mashup, like future punk EDM cover of an old emo song, to, okay, great. This is like trying to help an artist figure out where they toe the line between hyper pop production and like old school, like big anthem guitars. Right. And then pulling out different lessons and thinking of it not as, I want this to sound just like all of these, but then have each mix, have each production fit the artist more than anything else, and really get good at that. And that's why I do take a lot of time. And some people might work to be like, hey, send me your thing. I'm going to send it back to you. I'm going to pop it in my template. And then you will get the drum sound and the sound for this genre with that. Right. And that's one way of doing it. And there are certain things and shortcuts that I can take to make that more effective if that's what somebody's coming to me and wants. But I take a little bit more time with a conversation like this, face to face, to try and get to know where the band sees themselves, what some of their references are, what some of their influences are, because maybe they like a really interesting band that did something really cool sonically that all of them agree on. And it's a moment that we can pull into the record that nobody else in that specific genre is kind of doing. And I think that's ultimately more important for a band in pressing through and kind of cutting through all of the noise on DSPs and social media, as it were, right now. So I like to try and do that and just be like, what is truly unique and interesting about you from an influence standpoint, from an origin story standpoint, and then from the taste standpoint, that if it's a solo artist that you have and have refined, or if it's a band, it's like, hey, I loved it. A band that I worked with years ago. It was the same thing called With Friends Like These. They like a modern pop punk band that kind of was very in that realm. Like wrote some crazy vocal lines, not dissimilar to like I Call Fives in that nature, and a lot of the Panic at the Disco type stuff. Like I remember their one guitar player had an idea and referenced I think it was a part in a song by this band, The Architects, and and it was like a thing where I was like, that's not really, it's like, it's modern and it's a rock band, but it's not in the genre that you guys are in. But he had a completely different, like, oh, I also love this like darker, heavier, like modern hard rock kind of stuff. And brought that and had a cool idea for a transition that the band loved. I was like, we should definitely do that. We should pull something like that in, and I love those moments and getting to know those more so than anything else, more so than just trying to keep it in line with what people are expecting in a genre. So it's, it's an interesting thing, but that's,
it's almost like a mixture of art and almost what you're talking about now just makes me think of like marketing almost. It's finding those ways to stand out, and that kind of plugs into the whole marketing realm, doesn't it? I mean, putting yourself apart from others in your genre, because there's a billion pop punk bands, but what makes what makes you different than the other pop punk band, that
right.
sound.
No, 100%. I mean, and what you're kind of floating right into another transition that happened, and like seemingly another hat that I somehow ended up wearing over the last 2 years, when we were forced to kind of lean completely into remote communication, was the fact that a lot of the artists that I was working with in the studio a couple years ago, would start to call me up after we were done the record and ask for, any thoughts or tips as far as releasing their stuff or, and kind of marketing. And what I, began to realize more and more was that, one, as a studio, you can just kind of be like, hey, this is a service. Like, here's the product that you paid for, like a restaurant. Here's the meal. Here's the check, pay the bill, leave, never see you again. Right. That it is in no way like that. And your paths are really kind of perpetually intertwined once you sit down and make a record and put yourself into it and really care about a band's record, and try to care as much as they do, because you'll probably never care as much, but it gets pretty close sometimes. And that's what I was like, man, I hate that, they put so much time, seeing bands that put so much time into the sonics and the songs and then have no conceptual idea of where to take it there afterwards. And, and I started seeing that a bunch, and then people would come to me and I was like, well, let's put some time in, maybe as we're finishing the record, to figure out what you can do after to roll it out, to give it its proper due and give it a chance at seeing the light of day and getting the kind of visibility that every artist hopes they get. Because if it doesn't, it's kind of starts to be that tree falls in a forest. If you just put it up on Bandcamp and hope that they will come
back to the trees in the forest,
right? It's all there. See, I'm very primed to circle back on themes.
That's what a true songwriter does, right?
Right.
I mean,
they're all right. This is my refrain, and then watch as we go into the outro. I'm going to give a different color spin to it, and you're going to be like, "Oh, whoa!"
My mind is just going to be blown.
The trees weren't even real, but it really is. And that's kind of how that functioned. And that's how I almost, I ended up getting into, a bit of kind of artist consulting and almost like artist, like coaching in effect, because there was no other real, kind of way to call it, other than doing it, on like a kind of like remote, virtual call basis. So
and I mean, I feel like the record process podcast is kind of it dives into that. And I know the most recent episode that was released in November, I know you're doing seasons, right? So you're currently recording season 2, right?
Yes. So and season 2 is actually going to sound much different, because season 1 kind of laid the groundwork with myself and my studio partners, talking through a lot of that, and kind of ending with even, an episode touching on exactly what we were just mentioning.
So I was listening to, I wasn't actually expecting to, when I looked up the Record Process podcast and I started combing through the episodes, I was really happy to see that most recent one, talking about the actual, finding your audience. And I remember one of the things that was talked about towards the beginning of the episode was cover art, and how there really needs to be a lot of thought put into that. And I think you had mentioned you should be thinking about that while you're actually recording in the studio. You should be thinking about what's this cover art going to look like,
Yeah. And I think, a lot of times that's not a crazy groundbreaking thought. I think a lot of artists do think visually as well, as sonically and verbally.
Absolutely.
But it's about kind of like categorizing those and cataloging those as you go to start seeing how they might all come together and coalesce. And even if you have ideas, just like sketching stuff in a notebook, or I'm actually working with a couple projects right now where I'm having them go and almost put together kind of like a mood board type thing, because they're getting ready to do a whole kind of brand refresh as they start to roll out all the new material that is, decidedly like much bigger, better, and larger that we've been working on with them. And it kind of feels like this is like a new chapter for them. So, working with them to kind of guide them through like, hey, pull together all of your different like inspirational, aesthetics, and see what the crossover is and see what best fits. And then it's all in one place, and you can have an ongoing brainstorm. And we're starting that process with them now. And they haven't even released they won't even release the first song until next month, that we've worked on together. And so that by the time like the second song, third song are starting to, to roll out and build, it's already like all of these things we're talking about are already thought out in advance of that kind of stuff. So it feels really, cohesive. And so, yeah. And we do, and I've watched that process with Wonder Years and, my singer, Dan, even before the songs are done, like lyrically and thematically, we, start ruminating and start tossing around. Well, I think like this is going to be an important thing, or I'm trying to like bring this back in this song. How can we do it, kind of thing. And then speaking to that musically as well. And I think that's what we've always tried to do. And that's what I'm trying to instill is now more than anything, creatively, artists are being asked to do more than ever themselves.
Yep.
And I think the only way to have a fair and honest shot at that without completely wanting to pull your hair out and quit forever is giving yourself more lead time to think through all of these things. And that's also kind of like a time management, scheduling, and organizational kind of front that is not always top of mind and the like number one skill set for creatives, to be fair.
And we always, I'm sure this happens to you. You write something that's absolutely spectacular. It's mind blowing. And the first thing on your mind is, I want to release this right now. Like you're just so excited about it and you want to share it to everyone. But it's like, well, wait a minute. I got to step back and I got to put all the other pieces together.
That's right.
Because otherwise you'll present it and it doesn't have that impact that it does on you. Like the excitement isn't there for the person consuming it. The excitement is just there for you. So it's like, right. Okay, I need to get all these other pieces in place around it in order to kind of explain why I'm so excited about this.
Totally. And you know what's interesting about that? Right before this, I just got off another production call with an artist who is honestly grappling with that same thing. We're just like, we're at the very beginning stages of working through a ton of material that he has demoed out. And the songs are great and awesome. And it's all stuff that he's done just, in his bedroom and across, across like at this point, like a couple months, years, depending on the track. And so there is almost an anxiety that he was kind of describing about, hey, I want to get these out. Like, but he also knows he's like, but I want them to be as good as they can be. So we're in that like proof of concept phase where I'm like, totally, I don't in no way want to hinder the momentum and progress that, any artist has planned, but also it's good to counterbalance that with, let's pause, let's take time and make sure that we're not letting this go before all of these things are explored. Right. And so there's a balance to that, right? Because then if you keep doing that, like perfectionism, is kind of the death of creativity and the death of progress in its own way. So trying to grapple with that, but also, understanding that you do want to keep things rolling downhill. And for a lot of them, I say, hey, if you can batch and think about it this way, if you're releasing a song, you're always going to be playing catch up every time you like finish a song, then release a song, then finish a song, and then are finishing a song. Whereas if you kind of get a head start, and honestly, I've done this with the perfect example. I've done it with the podcast, with season 2 of the Record Process. We have like 10 episodes already batched, ready to go. I could just like let all of those cats out of the bag right now, on the guests and how amazing they are. I have that same excitement. I'm like, holy shit, I want to tell you that, like, and I don't know when this will air, but it's just like, yeah, that the first episode that we do with Mayday Parade, that's the first episode of season 2, is unreal. They're talking about like the whole process of the self-titled record that they did and how the mindset that from the record before it impacted it and how everything got written. It's amazing. And it also speaks to like the human element of what it was like to be in that time and place. But I'm not going to just like, but then I have one that's ready to go behind it. And then I have another one that's ready to go behind it because I know I'm going to be on tour for 2 months, Whereas if I had just done that one and then let it out and people are like, hey, that's really good. And be like, okay, cool. Well, give me 2 months and then I'll get another one together when I'm back.
Have another one for you.
So it's the same kind of thing where like I'm trying to instill that mentality of putting a much longer schedule together if you can, and understanding how that can kind of set you up for success so that by the time you get to the third song on your release plan, you've already, if you're still like, in the works, you can spread that budget and that time allocation out to be like, you can already have another song done by that point in the time that you're doing, so that it kind of always keeps you a couple steps ahead as an artist. And so that if something does happen, you're flexible and can pivot, and say one song really takes off, then you have time to give it its moment. And maybe somebody else comes in who's like, hey, we would love to pick you up or put this out. Do you have anything else? Maybe you want to, there's like 5 songs here already. It's like, maybe we want to, a label wants to put a full length out with you or something. It's like, but yeah, then I already have like 4 more songs. I just need to track 1 more. Here they are, which is a much better place to be in for those relationships, especially if you're an independent artist. So yeah, I'm trying to help, structure and sometimes it's even just accountability. It's like hey, come check back in with me. How are you doing with all that stuff? I'm not going to like slap you on the knuckles with a ruler, because ultimately it's, you get out of it what you put in, right? But sometimes I always use the personal trainer analogy, right? You're not paying a personal trainer to like show you how to lift a weight. Maybe you are a little bit, but that's not what you're paying him for like years and years on end, right? You're paying them for the accountability to come in even on the days that you don't feel like working, and to give you that extra motivation because I'm going to see him tomorrow. And if I didn't do the thing, I'm going to feel bad when I lie to them, it's the guidance.
It's the whole guidance thing. And the moments where you need a little encouragement or a little push, all those things.
And it can feel really lonely too. Just be like right now in this climate, especially because so much of it happens digitally. If you're an independent artist, you're just like, I don't know, like, I know I'm like messaging with people, but there's no, like, when you shut off the screen, I'm just like, I kind of feel like nobody actually understands how hard I'm trying, And that can be really daunting too. So it all plays a role. And I'm just trying to sow all of the different experiences that I've had with Wonder Years, over the last 2 decades together. And, that's not trying to say that I'm like applying a Wonder Years mold or format to every band. Hardly, quite the opposite actually. And, but I'm using what I have benefited from greatly. And I'm super grateful to have had that time to learn all those things. So that's fulfilling. And that's another slice of the pie that is my day to day, but it's
Casey.
Cool and it's fun.
I feel like we could talk for 5 hours. Like there's so many different things to talk about. Just with you as a producer and an engineer and a songwriter and just an overall guru in development. In music development. There's so many different things there. But I know we're running short on time. So real quick, like, if people do want to get in contact with you, through True Level Studio, all that fun stuff, what's the best place? What's usually the format of how that works for you?
Yeah, absolutely. This shameless plug section of the segment, my favorite, honestly. Yes. You also got to, and this is the thing too, it's like you also got to be able to go out there and tout your victories, right? If someone's like, hey, what's your favorite band? I don't know, say your band. You know what I mean? Like, why, like that's maybe not it's like, it seems like an insane answer, but like also approach things with you should listen to my band. And I love when people are like, when I'm like, what else, what news out there? And they're like, yo, my band's EP is killing it. Here it is. Just like the unabashed confidence is like, sometimes that can be a little much, but I'm just like, that's great. Cause that's not a thing where they're just like too shy to like put it out there. Cause I think in this climate, part of it is putting yourself out there into the universe. So as I will put myself out there right now, you can find me at CaseyCavaliere.com first and foremost. And like just use that contact form if you want to get a hold of me, or I'm usually, honestly, at this point, I have settled into spending any of the time that I do on social media on Instagram. So you can message me there. And then True Level as well is just at True Level Studio. And our website is truelevelstudio.com if you're interested in that. Like I said, I'm down in Atlanta, but so I'll kind of be splitting my time between Atlanta and that studio in Philly as well. And yeah, the podcast that you mentioned is The Record Process.
Wait, everyone that's in a band or is about to join a band, or you're a solo artist or whatever, I feel like that podcast is such a great tool and everyone needs to go listen to it because it really just kind of lays things out and will kind of get your mind turning about your own creative process and just kind of it gives you guidance. So I think I'm really grateful, that you and Tom from True Level Studio have started that podcast, because we need more tools like that for the independent artist,
Yeah, well, that's very nice to hear you say that. I appreciate that, and I would also note that if you are interested in anything like that, then season 2 will be a whole new step up and above. Like I mentioned, the first episode, which on February 18th or February 8th, is going to be an interview with friends of ours from the band Mayday Parade, talking about their self-titled album that came out 12 years ago at this point. That's another, should have been a 10-year, right? We're in that doing the like that plus 2 math. But then also it's like, if you happen to be a Wonder Years fan, there's probably going to be an episode you're not going to want to miss that shortly follows that.
Hint.
Yeah. And then what we're trying to do too, like you mentioned, as an extension of the full kind of linear phase section by section of the process that we walked through in season 1, find different people, not always just the artist, but not always just the producer, because I think there's some shows out there that do some of each of those in a really nice way, but there haven't been any that we find that really from week to week try to shift and give you a different perspective of like, okay, this is going to really tell the story about songwriting and world building, about this record, and we even interview a good friend of mine that talks through the marketing and publicity end of a very notable release that came out in 2016 in the punk community. So like, there's a lot there, even within the first couple months. So yeah, I love the fact that it's cool because then you can hear the episode. And if you're not familiar with the record, because we're also trying to include some new and not just like, huge, like old legacy records. Some stuff that's, more modern and has just come out and is incredible and is getting a lot of attention and buzz and is worth the time to sit down to talk through it. It's a great opportunity to be like, hey, I've never heard this record, but now I just listened to the artist or producer that worked on it talk about the whole thing. And then it gives you this whole new light when you go listen to it and you're like, whoa.
Yes.
And I love that kind of stuff, that thing where it's like almost the inverse of what shows like Song Exploder that, the great podcast and, became a Netflix series does, but doesn't really goes into maybe the more technical end of it, whereas we try to cover a wide range of the time, place, circumstance, process, and really dive in a little bit deeper across a whole record or release. So we're very excited about it. And thank you for those kind words. Yeah. Anybody that wants to, we heavily implore you to reach out and let us know what you think as we get going here in this second season.
Awesome. Well, I'm excited to hear the second season. So, and then besides that too, obviously the Wonder Years, they're about to hit the road. That starts February 5th. Runs through March 25th, back to the whole 10-year plus tours, thanks to COVID. You're playing the Upsides and then Suburbia, I've Given You All, and Now I'm Nothing. Playing both of those records back to back because they're now 10 plus. And
they've aged. They've hit that age marker together.
I still can't believe like it's been 10 years already for both of those, especially Suburbia, because that was the first record that introduced me to Wonder Years, as it was for many. It's such a staple, and that's a whole nother podcast that maybe we'll get into one day. But that record carried the torch for the next generation of pop punk, I feel like, and obviously there was others to go along with it, but Suburbia was a big one. It just kept it going through the 2010s into now the 2020s. So
yeah, well, I mean, and that's, in anything I'm trying to do, or that Wonder Years has been trying to do, I don't think we saw that record in any way, or our band when we first started out having any semblance of that kind of impact. So we were grateful for any and all awareness or acknowledgement of what we were doing. So it is pretty crazy this many years later to think about that, and still wildly humbling. Thank you, Danny. Yeah, I wholly appreciate anyone that is still here or that's getting ready to come out and see those shows, or has, depending on when this comes out, has already seen any of those shows and sung along. And yeah, I think the understanding that just like the way I treat everything else, and kind of almost is so aptly titled in the name of the podcast, just like being part of the process, whether it be in terms of a genre or in terms of on a micro scale with, the journey of a song. Very happy to just play a small role in keeping that going, keeping it evolving, and I guess keeping that flame lit, so to speak.
Yeah. You're keeping it lit on many different ends.
Right. If we were like Gen Zers, we would say that in a way different way with emojis.
We're
keeping it lit.
We're keeping it. No, we're keeping it lit. Keeping it vibe. I don't know. I try not to. I feel like I'm always behind on what's the cool things to say and what's not. So
that's right. I'm still trying to figure out how to work emojis into a song. You know what I mean? Like what the sonic representation of those is going to be. So I don't know.
I'm still trying to figure out TikTok, man. Like I'm still, trying to, I feel like I need to go to school to learn that. And that's a whole nother thing, but
right. Or you just gotta, or it's just like, you just gotta do it and do it wrong and do it weird and do it strange until something fits, which is honestly kind of all any of us ever did. And I think most people in the realm of music are ever really doing, just figuring it out and hoping nobody finds out that they don't actually know
they don't know
as
shit.
much as they think, right? Yeah, none of us know anything, right? And so I'm just out here trying to just go with my gut and go with my instinct on some stuff, right? So anybody that's looking to follow me on that journey, and if it lands or weaves through how to figure out the sonic fingerprint of an emoji in a song, call me up. I'm here for that journey.
Awesome. Well, Casey, this has been a blast. I hope we can do it again sometime. And just overall, congratulations on everything you're doing, man. It seems like it's working out really well.
Oh, thanks, man. Yeah, I'm very happy. This was awesome. I appreciate you having me on the show. And have a wonderful year. We'll catch up soon.
All right. Sounds good. Well, that wraps up this episode of Pop Punk and Pizza Podcast. I'm Jacques Lamour. Thank you so much for listening. Please go back and listen to previous episodes of the podcast wherever it is that you get your podcasts, or you can go to poppunkpizzapod.com. And while you're there, make sure you sign up for our mailing list. You can also buy some merch as well. That would help keep the lights on here and keep the pizza flowing. When you go to our store, make sure you use that promo code POPPUNK at checkout to get $2 off your order. Thanks in advance for that. And also keep track of us on social media, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, TikTok. It's all at Pop Punk Pizza Pod. Our theme song sung by Krista Makes of Less Than Jake. I'll talk to you next time.
Hey, hello, it's nice.